Hello, and welcome to the Lighten Up Podcast with Lauren Polly, your invitation for living on the lighter side of life. I'm Lauren Polly, and I am delighted you have chosen to join me today for overall episode number 250. But more importantly, it is number 6 in the Resiliency Roadmap series. Again, this series is to go with my brand new ebook, Resiliency Roadmap. The entrepreneurial well-being is the focus. So we're continuing to unpack this entire topic of how do you build a strong foundation and have the ability to bounce back when you are constantly rocked in the world. If you are a sensitive person, if you are an empath, if you are someone who just has a caring business, you're probably a bit more sensitive to the ups and downs of the world. And with that comes a lot of reaction to the energies around you. I think it was episode number 3 of this series, we went over energy dynamics. So this episode that we're going to talk about today goes hand in hand with that. We're going to talk about managing pressure through mindful decisions. And as I was just saying, if you are somebody who is more in tune with other people, and let's face it, if you have a business, a lot of times it is people focused. Even if it's not outwardly service based, you're still going to have to deal with a lot of people on your team, people you hire, and getting out and about and making connections to get your voice out in the world. That's huge for business. It's really hard to succeed if you're not willing and able to do that. So we need to talk about not just the energy dynamic conversation like we did in episode 3, but today really talking about this reaction that we have around other people when we are sensitive or in tune, or we get our little feelings hurt, or our project launch didn't go well. We go into this dysregulated emotional state very, very easily. Speaking quite frankly, I think the majority of people live emotionally dysregulated. Just go to the supermarket or go to the mall and just sit still for a little bit and do some people watching. I bet you will notice people with hot emotions, people with big emotions. You may notice some arguments. You may notice people being shut down. You may notice a lot of body tension that usually goes hand in hand with being dysregulated. We are living in a world where people are not letting themselves find a neutral ground on the daily. And what happens when that baseline is always elevated, you are always one straw away from hitting your haystack to losing it. And losing it doesn't necessarily mean that you're having like a breakdown or like, getting really angry at people. It's not really an outward thing. It's just, God, that one thing hit my plate and it's just too much for me. And before you know it, you have to keep moving. You've got a business, you have a creative project going. You can't really hit pause on everything. So what do? You start making decisions that are probably not in your best interest based on your dysregulated stage and your reaction patterns. This is a huge topic. You've probably heard me talk about it before if you've been on my show and listening for a while. Because for me personally, I grew up very emotionally dysregulated. If you've read my book, you understand I have a huge history with mental health, anxiety, depression, mood swings, all the stuff, let's just say. And it's been kind of my lifelong journey to be able to find a regulated state for myself. And regulated, again, if we think about episode 2 in this series, isn't about finding a calm sea and staying there, right? That's the greatest lie most of us fall into. It's not that. It's being able to ebb and flow and ride those waves as they come to a degree where your boat doesn't necessarily get rocked. You don't go overboard. It's just you notice the little up and the down and you're able to kind of surf with it, if you will, It's like that sailboat who just finds the perfect trajectory and it's leading them in that direction they want to go. So how do we get there? If you are currently, and maybe take a beat, take a breath, take a moment for yourself, where is your emotional regulation right now? Where is your baseline stress level? Yikes. I think this is an important question to be asking every day. And the thing is, if we don't have this constant check-in, if we're not doing things regularly to watch our regulated state, we're always going to have, again, that higher baseline where we're going to be closer to making reactive decisions because of that. Why is this so important for entrepreneurs? You guys have way more on your plate than you would anywhere else. On my 9 to 5 job, I manage a hospital department. There's always stuff that's coming up. There's always little fires to be putting out. That's one of the primary roles, is reacting in the moment. That's one way that most of us kind of live, is we have our normal quote unquote job and we're dealing with what comes up there. Absolutely. And then you put on this entrepreneurial hat, and before you know it, you're responsible for everything, the money, the growth, being kind of the driving force, being able to lead a team if you have one. And when you have that dysregulated state, you don't really have the luxury that maybe you would somewhere else to take a pause and be like, you know what, today's like a 50% day. I have those sometimes where I'm kind of like, I'm just low energy. I'm feeling a little bit emotional. My state doesn't feel super regulated. I'm a little sensitive. I'm just going to do a bare minimum day. And that's okay. The hard part is when you are an entrepreneur, those days don't happen a lot. Or if they happen too much, you kind of put the brakes on everything, right? So for you in particular, it's really important to find a place and find strategies to be able to have this daily check-in. Where is my emotional load right now? Am I carrying things on my emotional plate that, one, probably don't belong to me? Not my circus, not my monkey. I don't need to be involved in that. That's a huge thing. And then being able to also look at, where am I putting myself in maybe a plate too full kind of situation? Are there some leaky faucets that you need to look at? This is a huge one for me personally, where sometimes if I don't do the things on my to-do list, or don't have the conversations, or don't have the kind of the nitty-gritty stuff going to make the wheels on my business turn, it sits near me energetically. There is this kind of like thing that's in the back of my mind. You got to do that. You got to do that. You got to do that. When I keep pushing it off and go into procrastination, it just gets worse. It is way easier just to be like, okay, my in-basket, my inbox, I need to go and clean it out. Difficult conversation with somebody, but you know what? If we have it, we'll clear the air and we can move forward. So being able to look at all of these different things, where are you overly involved in other people? Where are you putting yourself in kind of a dysregulated state because you're in procrastination or you're not doing the things you need to do? And then what is the cycle of life that you're in right now? Are there things that are happening in your family, in your day gig, if you have one, and you're doing your entrepreneur thing on the side? You have to really be aware that there may be energy flows on a bigger, more macro level. And making adjustments to that, or putting some more self-care in your routine, or taking a bit of a break, or leaning in when you need to, it may look different based on those factors. So those are kind of 3 things I'm always looking at, just to really look at, where is my baseline here, so that I don't go into a triggered state, right? It's so easy to push your buttons when you're dysregulated, because those buttons are like glaring at people. One little thing hits and before you know it, you're activated. So proactively, if you can kind of build a practice around this, daily is great. If not, at least once a week, sit down maybe with your weekly calendar, your to-do list, mapping out what you need to do for the week. What are you overly involved with that is not your job to do? What are you procrastinating on, and where are you filling your plate too much because you haven't moved the dial on those things? And then take that macro look. Look a little bit bigger and broader. What's going on elsewhere in your life? How's your body feeling? What's going on with your family? And maybe if you're super in tune like I am, looking a little bit bigger at the energetics of the world. When you can tap into that kind of macro stance, you may actually get more awareness of where your audience is as well. Really helps for content creation, because you can speak to people when they're aware of this as well. And then, of course, staying current and relevant topics is really great too. So taking all that into consideration on the weekly is just a beautiful and very easy, very practical way to start managing these energy dynamics that we've been talking about. Way more easy to be resilient when you are in the know and you are tuned in, right? So that is kind of like the proactive stance. Now, where do we go when we are in hot situations? Let's say our emotional state is dysregulated, we are stressed out, we are overwhelmed, we are super busy, or someone's just pissing you off. All of that counts. And all of that will happen, right? It is not this like, okay, cool. I've done my check-in with myself. I'm doing my self-care. I should be able to handle everything. That's not life. There's going to be hot situations that we go into. And the more that you're growing and expanding and scaling up or getting out in the world, you're going to hit different pockets of that. And you're going to have some intense times. That is unavoidable for any human. But if you are running your own business or in your creative zone, you're going to hit it probably more frequently, right? So where do we go when that happens? You've heard me say, not just in this series, but overall on the podcast or in my book, all of my stuff is really the core foundational point. The best self-care is self-awareness. How do you have self-care? Yes, you can do all these external activities, the yoga and the meditation and the check-ins and the massages and all the things. Awesome. But if you do not know how to take care of yourself in every moment, if you're not in tune with your mind, your body connection, if you're not really aware of what you need as an individual and aren't willing to stand up and advocate for that, care for yourself gets very difficult. And so you can be doing all the self-care practices in the world and still get super emotionally dysregulated. It's because you're not having that practical in the moment, how do I take care of me practice. And this is a huge muscle to develop. This is my sweet spot. This is what I've done, I think, kind of like my life journey, my life purpose, and what I love to continually present to people. Because I feel like if all of us were better at knowing what we need in the moment, how to navigate those momentary upsets to get what we needed, all of us would be more emotionally regulated and the planet would feel very different. It wouldn't be quite so hot and intense, right? The hard part is you can be on that journey, and I invite you to dig into that. But what happens when you meet other people who aren't? And that is just a given, right? So being able to take care of what you need in the moment when you're in an interaction with someone who does not have that same skill set, things get more tricky. What do you need to do? You need to know your triggers. You need to know where your baseline is. Absolutely. We've already talked about that, but now we need to know what triggers. Are you somebody who reacts to pushy people? If so, it may behoove you, so to speak, if you actually spent some time developing some strategies around those situations. What can you have in your pocket when you are hot and reactive and your blood pressure is up and you just don't have that moment pause to reflect before you speak? What are some strategies that you can have in your back pocket that are practiced and ready to go that allow you to do so? I've learned a lot about this, not necessarily from the entrepreneur side of my life, but from my hospital job side. I deal a lot with hot emotions, end of life, long-term disability, upset customers, all of the things, right? I've learned really well, one of my key techniques triggers when people start pushing at me, angry, intense energy. I need to put both of my feet on the floor. I don't cross my legs, I uncross them, and I physically sit back in my seat. And I take a breath. That simple body movement that I have practiced over situation, over situation, over situation has served me in my entrepreneurial journey. I'm getting nervous on an interview, someone's challenging me. What do? I uncross my legs, I plant both of my feet down, I sit back in my chair, and I take a breath. Why do I sit back? Well, because when people are pushing at me, then what my reaction to do is to push back, which doesn't usually go very well, right? And I've watched myself in situation after situation make things worse because I dove into that. So I started getting very clear about what is my trigger? How do I work it And how do I practice it so that it's more innate and almost unconscious? So this is a huge technique for me, and it's something so easy. That's one of my bigger triggers when dealing with people. I invite you to look what yours is. It may be the opposite. It may be somebody who's not interacting with you a lot. And what do? You get frustrated and you start pushing at them. Well, I wonder what you could do with your body, with your mind. That only takes a second or two to just come back to more of a neutral stance, so that the emotion of the situation isn't what's driving the conversation, and you're not making decisions based on that. Think of the last client that you dealt with. Maybe an unhappy customer, maybe somebody who was expecting a whole bunch of stuff and the expectations didn't align with what you wanted to give. And maybe you were super clear about that ahead of time. They just didn't hear you. That happens a lot. Where did you go? What did your body feel like? Did your heart rate increase? Did you start to sweat? Shoulders come up near your ears? Did you find yourself starting to lean forward like you were ready to jump in and defend yourself? What if you actually started recognizing those patterns, whatever they are, and ask yourself these questions? Number one, what triggered it? Start to look for commonalities, write it down, get super clear. We're getting conscious here. We want to be clear with this. Number two, what was your body positioning and how did it feel? Look for all of those signs of how things feel inside and what your body did in response. And again, if you do the people watching trick that I talked about before, you're at the mall just kind of looking around to get a sense of what these dynamics are. Watch to see what happens when people get upset. They lean in. They take a more defensive posture. They cross their arms. Look to see where maybe you're doing something similar. From there, what do? We start to get super conscious about choosing the opposite, choosing something different and making that pattern really, really ingrained so that when things come up, you have that in your bucket. Whilst going through your entrepreneurial journey, there are so many different ways this pops up. It's not just with customers. That will happen a lot if you're in a service-based, people-based business. Even for me, when I was writing my book, I worked with a bunch of different editors. One in particular was wonderful. He's actually edited some very, very well-known and successful books, but he's very, very traditional and his manner was very aggressive. And again, what have I said before? That's one of my triggers, is the pushiness, right? He would come at me with suggestions and I would react so strongly to it. It was not conscious, it was not mindful, and it was based on pressure. This internal pressure of, I really don't want to do that, but I think I have to, right? So what did I have to do with that one in particular? Yes, I used my tricks of sitting my body back, but more than anything, I needed some space. I needed to sleep on it and have some space to have my reaction. I wasn't going to shove that down. I was going to let it come out. But then I needed some space to actually get myself more emotionally regulated so that I could make a clear decision. And it was so funny because one of his suggestions was just breaking my book up into chapters, which seems kind of like pointless. Like it shouldn't be a big thing that I would get so upset about putting chapters in my book. But the way I had originally wrote it was just these different scenes that kind of went together. To me, it was always like a tapestry of stories that interwove themselves beautifully. And the idea of putting a chapter on it just seemed really strange to me. It was like, perfect the way it is. Don't touch it. That was the energy, right? And so just his suggestion about, people like to read a chapter at a time so they can then put a bookmark in and come back to it later. I was so reactive to it, but after I slept on it for a couple of nights, it was, you know what, that actually makes sense. And it feels kind to the reader if that's what they're used to and that's what they're expecting. It made the book better. But if I was in my reactive state and I jumped down his throat and just said no, which was my original reaction, it wouldn't have been as amazing as it is. So it's interesting the way these things pop up. And I'm just giving you different examples so that this is not just a people-to-people anger, unhappy customer situation. This is nervousness at an interview. This is being pushed and put on the spot at a networking event. This is having someone that you've hired for a big project give you feedback and information that you may not be in tune with initially, but you're not in tune with it because you're reacting you're not actually in tune with it or in a clear state to go, if I look at that logically, and if I sit with that energetically, when I am energetically clear, it actually makes a whole bunch of sense. So this is a huge conversation. There are so many different angles with it, right? But the big takeaways from the episode today, I want you to start that self-care practice, weekly check-in, daily, whatever you need to do, looking at your emotional plate. What are you taking on from other people that you don't need to be? Where are you overly involved? What are you procrastinating on? Where if you just moved on it, the pressure in your world would decrease. The voice in the back of the head would go away, right? And where are you, again, putting a little bit too much on your plate, or looking at that macro level of where is the cycle right now? What's going on outside of my business? And do I need to make some accommodations to ride that wave a little bit better? Is there something going on in the world? Are there life events happening for me? Is my full-time gig being busy this week that I need to pull back a bit? Having more awareness on that is going to help the baseline of that emotional part of your life calm down. And then number 2, actually starting to get super clear on what triggers you. Again, different for everybody. And do what I did. Sit down with it and look at different scenarios. Yes, people who are hot with you. That's easy to do. Start there. But start to then, after a while, get clear on that response. See where else it pops up. Where else in your business have you shot yourself in the foot because you made a choice based on your dysregulated state? Get super clear on what triggers you. Start to then be aware of what happens when you do. How does your body feel? What position are you taking? Are you shut down? You speak up? Just start getting really clear about what that patterning is for you. And then start practicing the opposite. I guarantee you will have immediate change once you hit these places. And if you can manage your baseline stress level, and then you can manage how to take care of yourself when hot situations pop up, you're going to be in a golden state. These are keystones for being connected to yourself and being clear with your voice. And those are the things that drive our business. I have had an amazing time with this conversation. I hope this is building a foundation for you. It is the foundation that I have gone on years and years and years to build for myself. If you haven't gotten the free ebook yet, Resiliency Roadmap, the link is in the show notes down below. It's a free download. And please give me some feedback. How are these conversations landing in your world? Is it helping? And perhaps, what's the next step for you? What other information would really be clear? I am right now developing a membership program for creative entrepreneurs, heart-based entrepreneurs, so that we can meet monthly and have more of these conversations going. And I understand it's so fascinating. The more I start to build this, the more I'm aware of people's mentation when they're building a business isn't about taking care of themselves at all. It is really about everything going to the business, everything going to the tech side of it, the development side of it. And so many of us lose our passion for it and lose our creative voice and spark and interest because we're not including ourselves along the way. So this ebook, this podcast series, it's the first step. There will be more coming, but I would love to hear from you to know what next steps for you would be helpful so that I can create accordingly. All right, guys, have an amazing week. And the last 2 podcasts in this series should be coming out shortly. We are going to be talking about individualism, being authentic and you in your business. And then the last one is delicious. It is life beyond success, going into a life of meaning, and really what an entrepreneur journey is looking like if we are focused on that. Have an amazing week. And as always, I will chat with you soon.